Well, let's look at how you do a CMA using the Paragon CMA module. I'm going to come up to CMA, and notice how I have create presentation, and that's what we're going to utilize. Also note where it says Cloud CMA. This is one way to get into Cloud CMA, but that's not how I'm going to recommend for you. You're going to find that inside Paragon, there's multiple ways to get to the same product or tools. I'm going to recommend a different way. That way your comparable properties are automatically imported into Cloud CMA. Let me hover over CMA. Let me create a presentation. Here we go. And now we have it. Now, as you look over here on the side, you're going to see that there's a lot of steps that we're going to go through as we're creating the regular CMA that parallel the CMA Preference Wizard. To access the CMA Preference Wizard, you click on Preferences, move down and to the right, and you then click here to run through that particular wizard, which allows you to put in up to 3 resumes, 3 cover letters. If you're a broker or office admin, you can put in the office information that populates out to all the agents in your office, final comments, and you can select the theme that you want to have for your CMA. Because a lot of those steps are mirrored inside the CMA module, I'm just going to go to the CMA module and walk through that. But just note that it mirrors very closely. Now, if you happen to be an iPad tablet user, these wizards are going to be grayed out. So how do you go ahead and put in your default items like your resumes and cover letters inside Paragon CMA? When you click on Preferences, move down and to the left and click on CMA. There you're going to have the same steps you would have if you're doing the wizard, but that's where the iPad tablet can go ahead and drop in those different items. Another nice thing is that because everything is online and not saved on your computer with cookies, I could log in with my office desktop or my home laptop computer, and I can then go through and set up my details, my resumes, cover letters, and then on any other device, those things are there waiting for me. Well, let's begin the process. For this particular CMA, this is going to be for Bob Jones. So I'm going to just go ahead and type in his name. The name of your CMA needs to be unique because that's what Paragon is using to save it. So if Bob had 5 or 6 homes that he was wanting to sell, it might be Bob Jones 1, Bob Jones 2, Bob Jones 3. Again, creating unique names. As we're looking over here on the left-hand side in the navigation area, notice that I have grayed out check marks. As I complete a different item within a step, the gray check mark turns green, showing that you've completed that step. So let's go ahead and click on Continue, and notice how quickly I've now got my presentation name with a green check mark. Now, when it comes to creating your subject property, there's several different ways of doing that. I prefer loading my own subject property, creating it from scratch, but I could take one of my previous subject properties that may be a similar floor plan and use that to create that CMA, or I could use an existing ML number. I prefer to go ahead and create that using my own CMA, my own subject property. And as I do that, Paragon says, okay, what kind of property is it? Is it residential, rural, mobile, or commercial? Again, note that each of these different property classes, you can, if you'd like, create a comparable market analysis. I'm going to say residential. As I open up residential, I do have basically a modified version of the listing input form used to add listings inside Paragon. You could put in your link number, and by putting in that link number, it'll then give you a lot of information coming out of the public records. You can come through and just add whatever you would like. So I can say single family. I can come down and put in whatever details I want for this. So again, I can come down. And remember that on a subject property, you're not going to have everything. You're going to have just those key things that you're looking for. So if I wanted to, I could then put in the address. So let me put in the street name. I can then put in my different details. Let me go ahead and put in my postal code. There we go. I can put in my region. Again, to Edmonton. Again, I can put in whatever details I want. I can come in again and make sure I've got all my different items in there, my zones and all. I can come down to my bathrooms and put in different pieces that I've got there. I can put in what I've got. So maybe for my half bath, I've got 2. For my 3-piece, I've got, or 4-piece, I've got 2, whatever. Again, put in whatever details I want. And when I've got in what I need to have, I can then go ahead and click on Save. And because this is not a complete CMA or listing going into Paragon, I'm not held to the same requirements as I might have when I'm doing a regular listing inside Paragon. So I've got some details in, and I would have put in more information about the style, the number of bedrooms, square footage, basement, the baths in your build. That way it helps me to go in and have a basic bit of information for this. Now, if I want, I can add pictures. And so let me go out and add a picture for this particular property. And I don't think I'll do that. But anyways, I could then come in and put in a picture later on. Right now, because your listing input maintenance is not fully turned on inside your regular system, adding a picture is not available to you. But once Paragon becomes your only ML system, you'll then be able to add that picture. Well, as you're working inside Paragon, I recommend that you periodically save your work. That way, in case you have a power outage or a dropout of the internet, you have saved up to that periodically. That way, you can always go back and pick up the other details. Now, let me come on down to client. When it comes to client, if this is a brand new seller I'm working with, I'd add a brand new client. If this is someone you've worked with in the past, you could go ahead and select them from the list of clients that have come over to Paragon from ML Exchange and Fusion, or that you've recently added yourself directly into Paragon. Let me go ahead and add a brand new client. As I do that, let me come in and put in some details. I know this is Bob, so a first name is required. A last name is also required, and I can also put in email addresses if I want. Now, that's all the information that's being shown on the screen right now, and I could go ahead and save it, but may I recommend you go ahead and click where it says Add Additional Client Information. By doing that, I could put in Bob's wife and her email address if I wanted, but what's really important is down here at where it says Address, note that I have 4 separate address fields. And it's not just a label, it's 4 separate address fields. So let me come in and put in Bob's address. Let me put in the postal code again. And I could then put other details. But I highly recommend you put in the address and then save it, because Paragon's going to ask for that address multiple times as you walk through the CMA module. And this then makes it so you put it in once and it's then there, and you don't have to put it in multiple times. So I've added the contact. I'm going to go ahead and save this again, making sure I save the contact inside the CMA module. And I just use the wizard button and click on Next. As I click on Next, Paragon's going to ask me to add comparable properties. So just following the visual cues on the screen, I'm going to click on Add Comparables. And Paragon then asks me, how do I want to add my comparables? Do I want to use a class search like residential, rural, mobile, commercial, or maybe even a multi-class search? Maybe I want to use an address search. Maybe there's specific ML numbers I want to use. Maybe I've got some properties that have been tucked away inside listing carts. I can create customized listing carts for myself, and maybe it has to do with each of my different subdivisions that I work in. But again, I can use any of these tools to put in my search for my comparable properties. I'm just going to choose residential, and I'm just going to go ahead and choose the same residential properties I had used before. Again, you'd put in the different criteria, maybe even use a map shapes in order to identify the region to pull your comparables from. With this in place, I click on Search. I come back out and I'm looking at my spreadsheet as this now is coming up. So I've got the grid. Again, I would select all the properties and then walk through and deselect any properties that no longer fit what I'm looking for. So I can again come down and choose these different properties. I'm just doing a left mouse click and holding it to deselect multiple properties. Again, I can come right on through, choose what I'm looking for my comparable properties. I'm just going to come down a little bit lower. And have the comparable properties I want to use. With that in place, I now want to click on the button that says Add to CMA. By clicking on Add to CMA, Paragon's going to ask, do you want the 19 that are selected, all that are in your list, or the last one you clicked on? Please note that inside the CMA module, you're limited to a maximum of 50 comparable properties. I'm well under that number, so let me just go ahead and click on Select for the 19 I've got selected. I now have those properties here, and again, let me go ahead and click on Save to save my comparables up to this point. Again, if I needed to, I could choose particular properties and remove them, or I can move them up and down to put them in the right sequence as I make my presentation. Also note that I could do another search. It is possible to do multiple searches and append to this list of comparables. Once I've done those different searches, I can go through that list of comparables, finding my exact list I want to utilize, and then move forward with those 19 in this case. So let me go ahead and click on Next. And this is where we come over to making adjustments. And there's a lot of folks that just skip over this part because this is where you're going to have your most time applied to doing your CMA. Look over here on the right-hand side. There are some different fields that are available for you to look at comparability. If you want, you can add additional fields to provide that differentiation between your different properties, your subject property versus your comparable property. And what we have available for you is that you can, if you want, make adjustments to the different properties. So let's assume that my subject property was 4 bedrooms, 2 full baths, and 2 half baths. Well, 4 bedrooms is okay. Notice that the comparable has one more full bath than my subject property. And so I could come over to the side, push the minus sign on my keyboard, and I could take off an amount that would be appropriate for, let's say, a full bath. Notice down below that my subject property has 2 half baths, my comparable only has 1, so I could then add a value. So let's say maybe a half bath is worth $20,000. And so I could step through each of my different properties, making adjustments if I wanted, making sure that my comparable properties are as similar as possible to my subject property. And based on that, it then makes it very easy for me to determine a recommended listing price for my client. Now, as you're working through each of these different comparable properties, I recommend you use the red arrows. And by using the red arrows, you can step through and make adjustments on each of these different properties. Now, if you are doing adjustments, and again, you don't have to, you have the ability to add a manual adjustment. So let's assume that there's something that is not a regular property field, but I want to add. I can, if I want, just go ahead and click on Add a Manual Adjustment, and a field appears down at the bottom. And maybe it's a workshop. So we have a workshop, maybe the subject has it, the comparable doesn't, so I need to add to the comparable a value for a workshop, let's say. Now as I move over to my next comparable property, notice down below I still have workshop available for me, but there's no value there. On a property by property basis, I can then add or remove different values for each of the different manual adjustments I've made. Also, as you're working through the preferences area, I can also add a saved adjustment. I've added a couple of them. Maybe it's a home theater. So I could select home theater, click on add, and it's now been added also. So again, if you want to, you can go ahead and add different adjustments to make these properties as comparable as possible. Again, periodically I save my work. Notice the confirmation rectangle in the upper right-hand corner saying that yes, you've saved your CMA. Now, if you're one that's not going to do any adjustments, you've done a really good job at finding comparable properties. When you get to this point, you could just click on Next. Or if you are going to make adjustments, you can click on Next, Next, Next with the red arrows, making adjustments to each of those different properties. And then once you've made the adjustments, go ahead and click on the green Next button to move you on. As we move on, we're now going to parallel some of the different things you'd be setting up if you ran through the CMA Preference Wizard. The first one is the theme. As you're looking at the theme, I want you to see by choosing different themes with the radio buttons coming down the left-hand side, we have a different set of themes that we can be working with. Now, what's nice about this is that with these first 4 items, we take a sampling of color and with a little bit of texture, apply it to just the tops of the additional pages. And so these first 4 have those different colors that themes that we'd be using, applying color to the tops of the pages. We also have contemporary, and with contemporary, the only thing we carry over to the other pages is the color of the different titles. And then there is a basic. And with the basic, you can see how we've removed a lot of the coloring to it and made it more simple. See where it has this kind of a swiggle here? That's where your office logo would be dropped in when you've gone through and set up your different agent image and office logo through your preferences wizard. I'm going to come back up to the Vivid and click on Next. When it comes over to footer, you have the ability to use the footer if you would like. If you choose to use the footer, you can have up to 85 characters of text that appears at the bottom of each page. That may be your tagline, it may be your motto, it may be something you promised to do, but you can have it there. Now, if you don't want anything there, you can just leave it empty. Nothing appears if you leave it empty. And then you can determine how you want that text to be aligned. Is it to the center as I've chosen? Is it to the left or to the right? Down below, I have my office logo and my agent image. These have been brought in from my preference wizard that I set up, but I could, if I wanted, click on the picture, go back out to my picture library, and choose a different picture. So let me come out to my picture library. Instead of using the couple picture, maybe I want to use my business gentleman picture. By going ahead, highlighting with the orange background and clicking on Insert, I can then change that particular image I'm using. If I'm only using one image, do I want it to the left or to the right of the text that appears in the footer? With that in place, I click on Next. I can choose my disclaimer. I've chosen the short disclaimer. You could choose none, or you could choose the long disclaimer. It just depends upon what you'd like to use. By clicking on Next, I now come over to my presentation setup. And by coming over to my presentation setup, I can come over and looking at the left-hand navigation, choose which property reports I want to utilize for my CMA. Now, if I were using my Preferences wizard, so I clicked on Preferences, moved down to CMA, I could come over and pre-select these different documents. That way I don't have to select them on a CMA by CMA basis. But because I did not, I'm just going to come through and I can pick and choose which reports I want to utilize. Now, as I get down here to the bottom, note that I could upload additional documents. Gary's plan of action is additional document. Each document you would upload would be a PDF document, and that document each individual document needs to be 20 megabytes or less. That means you could have multi-page, great information if you wanted when it comes to those additional documents. And so let's say you wanted to have maybe some general statistics or information about a particular area or region, you could upload that information in and having that a part of your CMA. Now, if I uploaded it over here through Preferences, it'll be there for every CMA like Gary's action plan. But if I'm inside the CMA, creating a CMA for someone, as I upload a document, it's only available for that particular CMA. So you can give unique information for that particular seller and their home. You can upload that through a PDF document. Let's come back up to the top. I'm on my cover letter, and notice how my information for Bob Jones is automatically populated in. I then have prepared for, and this comes from my agent information. Down below, I have presentation description. So I could say CMA presentation and just leave it blank, or I could say CMA presentation for Bob Jones. Again, I can make this a little more customized. Now, down below, when it comes to cover page style, you have subject property centric as your default setting. And I think that is the proper setting to have. Because by doing that, I can also have a picture of my property being displayed on that page. And I can put in whatever kind of notes and comments that I want that'll appear on that cover page nearby that picture I put in. So again, you can put in whatever details you want. It's not going to recognize where you separate for paragraphs by putting empty spaces. It's all going to be one fluid set of comments there. And then if I want, I can have my office logo and my agent image appear there. Now that agent image was what I showed before was for my footer. This is something other than the footer. So if I wanted to have a consistency of the images, again, I could come back in, select my gentleman picture, and insert it. And make sure you check the box to make sure it's included. I'm going to save my work at this point. I now come over to my cover letter. Now on my cover letter, I have up to 3 different cover letters, and if I want to, I can come in and give it a title. So I'm going to say cover letter for Bob Jones. When it comes to the salutation, I always use dear. You can choose whatever you want. Paragon will automatically take the first name and last name and add a comma for that salutation at the top. Note that Paragon thinks I'm making the presentation today, so it's used today's date. But if this presentation is actually going to be made on Thursday, by clicking on the calendar, I can choose Thursday, or I could have just actually typed it in, the 2-digit month, 2-digit day, 4-digit year. As I move on down, if Bob had some kind of a prefix to go on before his name, like doctor, I could then go ahead and add that. Again, notice how Bob's address has been dropped in. When it comes to my closing, I like to say respectfully. So I can type that in, and then I can put in my name. Now, if Bob and I have been buddies since high school, I would probably just put in Gary. If I've never worked with Bob before, I might want to be a little more formal and put in my whole name, Gary A. Arnett. Now down at the bottom, this is where I would choose which cover letter I want to work with. Notice that I've got cover letters 1, 2, and there would be one for 3 that I could utilize. And I could then come in and choose the cover letters I've preloaded. If I've not loaded anything for, let's say, cover letter 2, I could select it, and by clicking on Modify, I could go in and add a brand new cover letter that would be available for future CMAs. Let me just say with cover letter 1, and I'm going to save my work. Clicking on Next, I come over to my agent resume. For my agent resume, you can see how I've got my different details for my agent resume coming right on through. And I do have 3 different resumes I could work with. If you're using multiple cover letters and multiple resumes, I would suggest that you compare resume and cover letter 1 together, resume and cover letter 2 and 3 together. That way when you select one, it's natural what the other one's going to be. Now, using the rich text editor, and this is the tool that would be available for you to add your cover letter, you have the ability to have a spell checker. This is your own dictionary, and you can put in whatever information you want or words you want to have in there. So as you're doing a spell check, if the spell checker doesn't recognize the word, you can add the word to the dictionary. You can also control the font face. Notice that Paragon has lots of different font faces. You could use a Comic Sans, more of a casual look. Again, different font faces you could utilize. And once you've selected the font face, you can then come over and choose the font size. You can make it bold, italicized, underline. You can change the color of the font. So as an example, if I wanted to change my name, instead of being in black, if I wanted to make it blue, I can just click on blue, and there it is. Again, a lot of different things I can do with this. Since I've made a change, I do definitely want to save that updated cover letter. And I move on, or it was a resume, excuse me. When it comes to the company information, this was loaded by the broker or the office admin, and then populates out to everybody in the office. If you opted not to use this, you could just uncheck the box. But as far as being an agent, you have no control of this area. This is under the control of the broker or the office manager, office admins. Clicking over next, I come over to subject property detail. And here you have several different subject property reports that you could utilize. I'm just going to use the basic report and continue on. Now, when it comes to the summary of adjustments, only those properties where I made adjustments are showing up here. For the other 16 properties, because I made no adjustment, they do not display. If I notice I made an error, I would need to come back up to step 3, adjustments, and make any changes. This is just simply a display of the different adjustments that have been made. Also note that because I am not making adjustments for full baths or half baths or home theater on this second property, the only thing that displays is the workshop. Once I've looked at that, I click on Next. I now come over to my comparable reports horizontal. By being here at the top, I have the ability to click, and I can then make customizations of what fields I want to have displayed along with this particular property report. I can find what I want from the left-hand side, add it, and add it to the right-hand side. And once I've got it there, I can use my move up or my move down buttons to place that particular value where I want it to be. And when I click on Save, I've now customized this report for future CMAs. Now, as I move down below, Paragon wants to know how frequently do you want to display your subject property in this report. If your seller understands their property, it may be not at all. Maybe you want to just put in on the very first page to let the seller know that you understand their property. But if you wanted, you could have it display on every property. I'm going to say just on the first page, and I want to have the statistics displayed associated with this report also. I want to have as much information available to me as possible that I present to my seller to help them understand why I'm recommending the price that I am. And then down below, you have the option to add some kind of a text field to it. I've opted to use the public remarks. Notice that there's other things that I could utilize. By using the public remarks, I'm going to have the wow factor of that particular property displayed for my seller. That way they have a better idea of what they're going up against when it comes to selling their property. Let me go ahead and click on Next. And by clicking on Next, I now come over to the vertical report. This is that same CMA quick view we looked at just a minute ago where there's 4 properties side by side. However you have that other report customized, that CMA quick view, it'll be showing up here and vice versa. So by clicking on where it says click here, I can add whatever fields I want over here on the right-hand side. And when I click on Save, I've actually customized 2 reports, exactly the same report, just with different names. Again, I want to display my statistics, and I want to display just that subject property on the first page. By clicking on Next, I now move over to the CMA summary. Now with the CMA summary, this is different than the CMA summary I showed you just a minute ago when it comes to the quick CMA I did. When we did the quick CMA, that CMA summary report was horizontal. It was landscape, so it was wider, and I could put in up to 10 different fields. In the CMA module, it is portrait, so it's narrower, so you only have up to 5 fields that you can customize. So I've chosen address, community, bedrooms, full baths, half baths as the fields I want to use for this particular report. Again, you're limited to just 5 different fields. By clicking on Next, we come over to comparable statistics. This is where we get into some of the graphs that Paragon uses. I do want to use X and Y axes. I do want to use major and minor grid lines for both the X and Y axes, and I want a legend that talks about what these different colors mean. Now, if green, red, and blue are not the colors you're used to, you can change it. If you're more of a green and blue setup, you can change that by just coming over, clicking on the square that you want to change. I'm going to change the red, and by using the slider, I can come over and find the color I'm looking for. So here I've got a green. Now to find the individual value I want, I can click out here in the gradient tool, find the exact color of green I'm looking for by clicking on Apply. Notice how it's now been updated. Also note out here, back behind it, by clicking on Close, I've now changed that color for green and blue. By clicking on Next, I come over to my comparable price analysis. And for the comparable price analysis, Paragon has several different values that you could choose from. You could choose the low price, you could choose the high price, you could choose the average price or median price, or you could choose the subject property price. Now, let me give you a hint there. This is not Paragon coming through and saying this is what you should use. I think you're going to find that if you went back out to the CMA spreadsheet, it is the first property that's on that spreadsheet that you're using as a comparable property. And so if you want, you could use that also. But again, there's no any kind of a reason for that being selected other than it's the first property on the spreadsheet. Now, if I want to, I can come in and actually change that price. So in looking at this, the high price is just under $1 million. The average price is $648. The median is $639.34. Maybe I think my property ought to be more like in about the $675. I can add that value to it, and this is where I like to do the preview. Although I could have previewed other pages, this is one where I definitely want to preview as I'm creating. That way I can then get a good idea of how this is going to be looking. Notice I've got this one property that's at $1 million. Maybe going back, I ought to remove that property because it's just so far out of the norm. But I can also come in and look at it and say, okay, this is the green where my subject property is at. Blue is the average price, and red is the low price. Again, I could change these colors if I wanted. But this allows me to see how these details are working in. Now, notice that it has 2 sets of graphs here. What's over here on the left-hand side is the raw data out of Paragon. Over on the right-hand side, that's the information based on the adjustments I did back there in step 3. And so there's been some cases where my subject property is way up high, but after I do the adjustments and make the property as similar as possible, my subject property now falls in somewhere between the high and the average price. By clicking on Close, I can come back in, make any adjustments I want to that. And by clicking on Save, here in the upper left-hand corner, I can save my work up to this point. By clicking on Next, I can now come over to the map. Remember, you could only have up to 50 listings on your map. And so by clicking where it says click here, I can set the zoom level. And now Paragon typically opens up where all properties are displayed, but if you wanted, you could zoom in a little bit closer. But again, notice how I've lost some properties off to the side. I could also zoom out a little more if I want to show more of the surrounding area. You get to choose the zoom level so you can show where these different properties are at. And by clicking on Select, you've now selected the zoom level for this particular map. So now that it's been selected, I click on Next to come over to my final comments. And with my final comments, this could be a variety of different things. I've seen some people put in just a final letter, just a personal communication to the seller, encouraging them to go ahead and sign the listing agreement with them or whatever. I like to put in, what will I do for my seller when they choose me to be their listing agent? So this is my service level agreement that I'm going to provide to my seller. This can be whatever you'd like it to be. And then if I wanted to, I could include Gary's action plan. Now, as we actually look at this, you're going to see it's a property report, but just realize that this could be your details, whatever, that you've got up to 20 megabytes per document. You can have up to 5 different documents. Well, when you're ready, click on Save. Notice that my presentation is now saved, and let me click on Next. And by clicking on Next from there, I'm now coming over where I'm ready to generate my presentation. So by clicking on Start, Paragon's now going to assemble the components. We're going to come over and look over here on the left-hand side in this navigation area and find all the different property reports that have been requested to be a part of the CMA presentation. And once those have been gathered, now notice that Paragon is converting all those documents into PDF. Also note that because this may take a fair amount of time, you could go out and work on different activities, be it adding and updating contact information, running searches, whatever. We just ask that you don't close down this tab for the CMA, that we can go out and go ahead and generate up. Now, as this is generating up, I want you to note that here in the CMA, I can save the components up to this point. I can even email this out. So let's assume you've got someone that is needing to sell the home, but they live over in Vancouver. And because they live over there, it may not be cost effective for you to drive over, fly over, or ride over to Vancouver. So you could email this out to your client. Now, given all the PDF documents here, this could be a very large file that you might try to email out as an attachment. Well, Paragon, instead of making that an attachment, makes it a hyperlink. And so you can then email a very small email to your client, and that could then go out as a hyperlinked email, very small and guaranteed to enter into your client's inbox. Now, what could be some of these documents you would upload here? It could be the listing agreement. Or if you want, you can just attach that, because you do, when you click on email, have the ability to add attachments to it. You also have the ability to go ahead and print this out. And over here on the side, you have the ability to print it, or you can even save this to your computer and then upload the CMA as a PDF into your contact record inside Paragon. Well, let's go ahead and scroll on down through and look at this CMA presentation. Now notice this is where my listing photo would be at for my subject property and how the comments appear off to the side. As I continue on down, notice it has who it was created for. Here's my cover letter. Notice the texture that's applied. Some of them are less texture, some of them are more, so you can pick and choose which one you want. And there's my cover letter. Continuing on down, here's my resume. Notice that coloring is more of a heavy watermark that appears just at the top. That was my office information we were looking at there. Now I have my subject property report. As I continue on down, you can see that I'm now looking at my adjustments. Again, only those properties where I made a numeric adjustment would be displayed. And now I come into my horizontal report. As I'm looking at my horizontal report, I have my property. Here's the listing ID number, the address, the price, and then the adjusted price. At the bottom, below the remarks, here we have what those adjustments are. You can see up top, those are the different fields I selected for each of my comparable properties to be displayed. Again, I can walk right on through, looking at all these different details. Let me just go ahead and grab this scroll wheel here and move on down a little bit quicker through this. And there's the statistics. Notice again, it's showing listing price, selling price, high, low, average, and median. Again, it's important to communicate to your seller what's going on as far as pricing of the comparables to help justify the price you're going to recommend. And now I have the vertical report. And with the vertical report, in addition to having the fields we had with the CMA Quick View, notice we're also displaying any adjustments and then the adjusted price. Let me scroll through this fairly quickly also. And here at the bottom of the page, again, are the statistics. Now, some people say, Gary, I'd only use the vertical view. I'd only use the horizontal view. May I recommend you use both views? And here's why. Everybody reads reports differently. I'm a numbers guy. Let me see numbers. That's what I key into. My wife is more of a reading person, and she'd prefer to see that in that horizontal view. Also in the horizontal view, I was able to display the public remarks. I do not recommend putting public remarks out here in this side-by-side CMA Quick View or the vertical view, because that would then force each of these different pages onto multiple pages. As I continue on down, I now come into my CMA summary. Again, notice how I've got each of my different properties being displayed. Here I have my active properties, and a little bit different. Instead of having high, low, average, and median, notice I'm given what the average is and then what the total is for the listings. So here I have my details. Now what comes standard on this report is the days on market. So days on market, listing price, price per floor area, and then selling price and selling price per floor area are automatically there. What I'm customizing is to the left of days on market. And here I come in with my bar graph. Now for each of the different bar graphs, we'll display up to 10 properties on that bar graph per status. And if I had, let's say, 12 properties, we'd put 10 on the first, and then there'd be 2 on the second. When we come over to our sold properties, again, there's multiple sold properties here. So we have the first 10, there's the remaining 2, and then we have the statistics. Below that, we have our comparable price analysis, where we have the raw data versus the adjusted data for the properties, and we have then the statistics for those for both the raw data out of Paragon and then the adjusted data after you've made adjustments to the comparable properties. Below that, we have the map. And so here we have the different properties, and we'll display up to 15 properties on that first page of the map. Notice we have the numbering scheme. Here's the different ML numbers for this, the address, city, province, and postal code, and then we have the price. Then there's the balance of the properties. And then this is my final comments. Now down below, this is where my action plan would be. And I've just used a property report that's a 2-pager, showing you that you can have multiple pages when it comes to each of these different documents. Again, you can have up to 20 megabytes, and you can have 5, 10 potentially different pages there, depending upon how many graphics you have along with it. If you like what you see, then you can go ahead and print it or email it, and it's available for your client. Now, just talking through this, you can see it took me a fair amount of time to talk through how you would set up the module CMA. A lot of good information there. You can pick and choose what you want to have. With the addition of your own documents at the bottom, you can go out and create, using whatever report writers you've got, to create the different graphs and charts and other details you might want to have about this property and the selling process that you would include as a part of your CMA, and you do that through the upload document area. And that's the CMA module.